Mom doesn't want you here anymore. It's time for you to find your own place, Dad. That's what my son-in-law said to me, standing in my own kitchen, in the house I had helped pay for, holding a cup of coffee like he owned the world. My daughter stood behind him. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. I was 64 years old, and I had just been told to leave. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I set down my dish towel, walked to my room, and started making a list. Let me go back to the beginning, because none of this happened overnight. My wife, Carol. We were married 31 years, passed away from a stroke in the spring of 2019. It was sudden. One morning she was making oatmeal, and by noon she was gone. There are no words for that kind of loss. You don't explain it. You just carry it. For about 8 months after, I lived alone in our house in Columbus, Ohio, a 3-bedroom colonial on a quiet street with a big backyard Carol had turned into a garden. After she was gone, I couldn't bring myself to go out there. The tomato cages just sat there rusting. The bird feeders went empty. I'd make dinner for one and eat standing at the counter because sitting at the table felt too big. My daughter, I'll call her my daughter throughout this, because that's what she is, and what she did doesn't change that. She called me one night in January 2020, right before everything in the world changed, and she said, "Dad, we've been talking. We want you to come live with us." She and her husband had a 4-bedroom house in Westerville, about 20 minutes from where I used to live. They had 2 kids, my grandchildren, a boy of 9 and a girl of 7. Good kids. Sweet kids. None of what happened was their fault. I hesitated. I'm a private man. I spent my career as a civil engineer, and if that job teaches you anything, it's that you measure twice before you commit. I told her I'd think about it. But the winter was long and the house was quiet, and eventually I said yes. We agreed on terms. I would pay $2,500 a month toward household expenses, mortgage, utilities, groceries. In return, I'd have the guest room upstairs, use of the common areas, and I'd help with the grandkids a few afternoons a week while they both worked. My daughter taught middle school. Her husband worked in pharmaceutical sales, which meant he was often on the road and, I noticed, often managed to be somewhere else when things needed doing around the house. I want to be fair. The first year was genuinely fine. I cooked dinners twice a week. I drove the kids to soccer and to piano lessons. I fixed the gutters, restained the back deck, and replaced the water heater when it died in October. I paid for that out of my own pocket, never mentioned it, never asked to be reimbursed. That's not the kind of man I am. But sometime in the second year, something shifted. I couldn't point to an exact moment. It was more like a slow turning of temperature. My son-in-law started making small comments, jokes that weren't quite jokes. Must be nice to have all day free. Or, we're running low on coffee again, said in a tone that made it clear he thought I was drinking too much of it. He started leaving the television on at high volume in the living room during hours I usually read. When I mentioned it once, politely, he said, "It's my house. I'll watch TV when I want." He wasn't wrong. It was his house. But I was paying $2,500 a month, and I had lived with more courtesy than that for 64 years. My daughter changed too, but in a different way. She started going quiet whenever her husband was in the room, deferring to him on everything, agreeing with things I knew she didn't believe. I'd known my daughter her whole life. I could read her, and what I read was that she was caught between 2 people and had decided which one she couldn't afford to lose. I understood it. I didn't like it, but I understood it. What I didn't understand, what I couldn't have anticipated, was the afternoon I came home from a doctor's appointment and found my son-in-law in my room. Not in the hallway, not knocking on my door, inside my room, standing at my desk, papers in his hand. I stopped in the doorway. "What are you doing?" He didn't even look embarrassed. He set the papers down slowly and said, "I was looking for the insurance documents for the deck repair. Your daughter thought you might have filed them in here." "Those are my personal financial statements," I said. He shrugged. "You left your door open." I hadn't left my door open. I never left my door open. I didn't say anything else. I walked in, gathered the papers, put them in my laptop bag, and later that night, I called my accountant and made an appointment for the following week. Because here is what my son-in-law had seen. and I knew it, and he knew I knew it, was that I was not a struggling retiree. I had a pension from 31 years with the state engineering office. I had Carol's life insurance. I had 2 retirement accounts and some investments her brother had helped me set up in the 90s that had done quietly, consistently well. I was not wealthy by any headline standard, but the number on those statements was just over $9 million. And I watched, over the following weeks, as my son-in-law's behavior changed again. Not toward me. He was still cold, still dismissive. But he started asking questions. Casual ones at dinner. Dad, do you ever think about what you'd want to do with the house, the Columbus house, eventually? Or have you talked to a financial advisor about estate planning? We know a guy, if you're interested. Or once, after my grandson mentioned I'd helped him with a school project about bridges, you must have picked up a lot over the years. That career must have paid well. I answered everything vaguely. I am not confrontational by nature, but I have built bridges for a living. I know how to assess structural integrity, and I was watching a structure I didn't like taking shape. The afternoon of the kitchen conversation, the one I started this story with, had come after a Sunday dinner that went badly. My son-in-law had made a comment about carrying extra weight in the household, which I knew was aimed at me even though he said it to the room. My daughter looked at her plate. I asked quietly what he meant. He said he meant that with 4 adults essentially living in the house, he counted me, expenses were getting complicated. I pointed out that I paid $2,500 a month and had replaced the water heater and repainted the garage last spring. He said, "That's not really the point, is it?" I asked what the point was. He said he thought it was time to talk about longer-term arrangements. I said I was happy to have that conversation. We didn't finish it that night. The next morning, Monday, while my daughter was at school and the kids were on the bus, he found me having coffee in the kitchen and said what I already told you. He said, "Mom doesn't want you here anymore. It's time for you to find your own place, Dad." I looked at him for a long moment. He was 41 years old, and he had a kind of practiced confidence that I suspected he used in sales calls. I thought about asking him to say it to my face with my daughter present. I thought about asking him what exactly had changed between Sunday dinner and Monday morning. Instead, I finished my coffee, rinsed the mug, set it in the rack. "All right," I said, "give me 2 weeks." He looked slightly surprised. I think he expected a fight and said, "2 weeks is fine." I went upstairs and called my attorney. Now here's the part where I need to explain something. I don't tell this story to make myself look clever. I tell it because I think a lot of people in my situation, older, recently widowed, trying to stay connected to family, don't realize what they have until someone else starts calculating its value, and by then it can be too late to be deliberate about it. I had 2 weeks, and I used every day of them. First, I called my attorney and asked him to review my will, which I had last updated after Carol passed. He was a quiet man from Gahanna who had handled my legal affairs for 20 years. I told him what had happened. He didn't editorialize. He just asked questions. By the end of the week, I had a new will. My daughter was removed as primary beneficiary. In her place, I established a trust administered by my attorney and my accountant jointly. The trust would distribute funds for my grandchildren's education, college, graduate school if they chose it, and provide modest annual disbursements to them when they turned 25 and 30. A small amount went to a local organization that builds affordable housing, something Carol had cared about. The remainder, the bulk of it, went to a foundation I was setting up in Carol's name to fund scholarships for engineering students at Ohio State. My daughter received nothing directly. I want to be clear, I did not do this out of anger. I did it because I had watched my daughter stand silently while her husband told her father to leave. I had watched her choose, and I accepted her choice. But I did not have to fund a life she had built without me. The second thing I did was call my realtor about the Columbus house. I'd been renting it since I moved in with my daughter. A good tenant, a young couple, they'd been there 2 years. I asked my realtor to begin the process of listing it. It sold for $340,000 in 6 weeks. That money went into the trust. Third, and this is the part that took the most thought, I found myself an apartment. I had not lived alone since before my marriage. The idea of it had frightened me, if I'm honest. That's part of why I'd agreed to move in with my daughter in the first place. But I found a two-bedroom unit in a newer building in Dublin, Ohio, a suburb with good walking paths along the river, a library within a mile, a grocery store 2 blocks away, second floor, good light, a balcony where I thought, eventually I might try growing something small, nothing like Carol's garden, but something. I signed the lease on a Wednesday. I moved out on a Friday, 14 days after my son-in-law's kitchen speech, exactly as I'd said. My daughter was home when I loaded the last boxes into my truck. She stood in the driveway. I hugged her. She held on longer than I expected, and I felt her start to cry, and I said, "I love you. This doesn't change that." Because it was true, and I wanted her to know it regardless of everything else. She said, "Dad, I'm sorry." I said, "I know." I didn't say, "But sorry doesn't rebuild what was broken." I didn't say, "I've already spoken to my attorney." I didn't say anything else at all. I just got in the truck and drove. The apartment was quiet in a way that felt different from the Columbus house after Carol died. That had been a heavy quiet, a grief-soaked quiet. This was clean. I made my own hours. I made my coffee strong the way I liked it, without anyone sighing about the smell. I took long walks in the morning along the river path. I joined a woodworking class at the Re-Center on Thursday evenings, something I'd always meant to try, and found I wasn't bad at it. My grandchildren visited on the first Saturday of December, which my daughter arranged. My grandson showed me a science fair project about water filtration. My granddaughter had lost another tooth. We ate pizza and watched a movie, and when they left, my grandson hugged me at the door and said, "Grandpa, I like your apartment. It smells like wood." I didn't explain that I'd spent 3 Thursday evenings sanding a small shelf I'd made. I just told him I liked it too. I did not hear from my son-in-law. 6 weeks after I moved out, I received a call from my daughter. Her voice was different, tight in a way I recognized as controlled distress. She said things had been a little stressful financially. I listened. She said her husband's sales territory had been restructured and his commission structure had changed. She said the mortgage payment had gone up with the new escrow adjustment. She asked carefully if I might consider resuming the $2,500 monthly contribution temporarily until things stabilize. I let a moment pass. I said, "Sweetheart, I can't do that." She asked why. I said, "Because I've restructured my finances. I've spoken with my attorney about what makes sense going forward, and contributing to household expenses that aren't mine isn't part of the plan." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "What does that mean exactly?" I said, "It means I've taken care of myself, and I've taken care of the grandchildren. I hope things get easier for you. I really do." She didn't push. We talked for another few minutes about small things, the kids, the weather, whether I'd figured out the parking situation at my building. We said goodbye warmly. 3 weeks after that, my son-in-law called me directly. It was the first time he had called me in the nearly 3 years I'd lived in his house, possibly ever. He started by asking how I was settling in. I told him fine. He asked about the apartment. I said it was comfortable. There was a pause, and then he moved to what he actually wanted to say, which was that he understood things had ended on a weird note, and that he wanted me to know he didn't have any hard feelings. I said, "I appreciate that." He said he was sure I could understand that the dynamic had gotten complicated, that it was nothing personal, just about space and boundaries. I said, "Of course." Then he said, "I know you've always been generous with the family, and I was hoping that generosity might extend to helping us get through this stretch, even a temporary loan, whatever you're comfortable with." I had been waiting, I realized, for exactly this moment, not with anger, with a kind of flat, clear certainty. I said, "I'm not going to do that." He said, "Dad." "Please don't call me that," I said. It was the only sharp thing I said in the entire conversation. "I'm your wife's father. That's the relationship, and I've provided for my grandchildren. Beyond that, I've done what I can." He tried twice more, different angles, different softness in his voice. I didn't argue and I didn't explain. I said goodbye and ended the call. I sat with it for a while after, looking out the balcony door at the gray December sky. There was no satisfaction in it, not the kind people might expect. What I felt was more like a door finally closing, not slamming, just clicking shut, the latch catching the way a well-built door does when the frame is true. The spring after I moved out, I started growing tomatoes on the balcony. Small ones, cherry tomatoes, the kind Carol used to put in salads. I bought 2 pots and a grow light for the early weeks, and I followed a guide online, and by June they were producing more than I could eat. I brought some to the woodworking class. One of the men there, a retired school teacher named, well, that doesn't matter. He said they were the best tomatoes he'd had in years. I told him my wife had taught me what to look for. My grandchildren came every few weeks throughout the spring and summer. My grandson was getting interested in how things were built, bridges, buildings, the structural logic of the world. I started telling him things I hadn't told anyone in years, stories from job sites, the engineering problems that had kept me up at night in my 30s. He listened the way kids sometimes do when they're genuinely curious rather than just being polite. My daughter and I found a rhythm. We had lunch together about once a month, usually at a diner she liked near her school. We didn't talk about the past. We talked about the kids, about her classroom, about small things. I think she understood without my saying it, that something had shifted permanently. She didn't ask about money again. She didn't bring up her husband's situation. I didn't either. I can't tell you that everything was resolved neatly. Life doesn't work that way. She's still my daughter. He's still her husband. There are still Sunday dinners I'm not invited to, and probably conversations in that house I'll never know about. But I'm 65 now, and I have a balcony full of tomatoes and a shelf I built myself, and a grandson who asks me questions about load-bearing walls. On Thursday evenings I drive to the rec center and work with my hands for 2 hours, and I come home smelling like sawdust, and I eat dinner at my own table, at whatever time I choose, in whatever quiet I want. My attorney tells me the trust documents are in order. Carroll Scholarship Fund distributed its first 3 awards last spring, engineering students at Ohio State, 2 women and a man. I have a photo of the ceremony on my fridge. My attorney sent it. I look at it sometimes when I'm making coffee. I think Carol would have liked what I did with it, not the conflict. She would have hated the conflict, would have wanted me to try harder to bridge it. But the scholarship fund, the students, the idea that something she cared about gets to keep going after both of us are gone. I don't know what my son-in-law tells people about what happened. I don't know how my daughter explains the arrangement to her friends, to her kids when they're older, to herself late at night. That's not mine to know. What I know is that I set my coffee mug in the rack that Monday morning, walked upstairs with my dignity entirely intact, and started making a plan. At 64, after 31 years of building things meant to hold weight and bear load, I still knew how to build something that lasts. Some things, it turns out, you don't unlearn. There's a photograph on my refrigerator. 3 young people in caps and gowns, squinting into the sun outside an auditorium at Ohio State. I don't know their names yet. My attorney sent the photo after the first scholarship ceremony. But I know what they're studying, and I know Carol would have wanted to meet every one of them. I look at that photo sometimes and think about cause and effect. Not in a dramatic way, just the plain, quiet logic of it. My son-in-law walked into my room without knocking. He saw numbers on a page. He made a calculation, and every decision he made after that. The careful questions at dinner, the manufactured tension, the Monday morning speech in the kitchen, followed its own internal logic. He thought he understood the situation. He didn't understand that I'd spent 31 years building things designed to outlast the people who built them. What I've come to believe at 65 is that character is mostly just the accumulation of small choices made when nobody's watching. I could have argued that Monday morning, I could have called my daughter at school and demanded a family meeting. I could have spent the next 6 months trying to fix something that had already shown me exactly what it was. Instead, I rinsed my mug, set it in the rack, and went upstairs to make a plan. That's not coldness. That's the discipline of knowing when a foundation is unsound, and when it's time to stop loading weight onto it. My son-in-law had a certain kind of intelligence, quick, transactional, good at reading rooms. But there's a difference between being smart about people and being wise about consequences. He saw a retirement account and thought about access. He never stopped to ask what kind of man had built that account over 40 years, or what that man valued, or whether being quietly useful for 31 years of marriage might have taught him something about patience. That gap between cleverness and judgment is where the whole thing fell apart for him. The harder thing to sit with is my daughter. She is not a bad person, I know that. She stood in the driveway and held on, and her apology was real. But she made a choice, repeatedly, over months, to go quiet when it cost her nothing, and to stay quiet when it cost her nothing, and to stay quiet when it cost me something. Integrity isn't what you do when it's easy. It's what you do when it's uncomfortable, when the person you love is watching, when you'd rather just not have the fight tonight. She's still learning that. Most of us are still learning that. What I want for my grandchildren especially is for them to grow up understanding that who you are when no one's testing you is the only version of yourself that actually matters. My grandson asks me about load-bearing walls. I tell him that a structure is only as strong as what it's resting on, that you can dress up a bad foundation with good materials and it'll hold for a while, but eventually the settling shows. He thinks I'm talking about buildings. I am. I'm also talking about buildings. I built a shelf this spring. Cedar, hand-planed, peg joints. It took 4 Thursday evenings and 1 Saturday afternoon, and it is not perfect. One end is about a 1/16 of an inch off level, but it is solid, and it is mine, and I made it with my hands. The tomatoes came in red by July.